The second piece of course material that I chose to evaluate for this module was a worksheet that I have used in my classroom. This is a worksheet on how to add and subtract fractions with like denominators. This is a worksheet that my students complete after doing a mini lesson on fractions. I previously evaluated Schoology, so you were able to view my folders and assignments. I pulled this worksheet from my Schoology course. My students would do the same. Then they would import it to Notability and fill out the PDF or Word document. Since I do use this document in my online resources with my students, I thought it would be a great piece to use to evaluate for the online learner. When we complete these worksheets, we do a few problems together, and then students can work individually or with a partner. We always try to highlight the I can statement at the top, and I try to model the I do, we do, you do with my students. When evaluating this worksheet, I think that there's a lot to be improved upon. First being the font. I don't like that the font is bold and fancy right here with the directions. I think it is confusing to the reader because the words are kind of close together and it can be hard to read. It's hard to read for me, so I can't imagine how it would be for someone who is visually impaired. I think that it should be more basic, simple, and clean. I would also like to change these notes to skeleton notes to make it more engaging for the students. So right now I just have a let's review, and then I have basically how you add and subtract fractions. I have it all filled out right here. I think a better way to do it is to make them skeleton notes, because then students are filling in as we go and are able to volunteer with some answers. So I think it would be more engaging if there were skeleton notes at the top. Looking at the UDL principles, it does not meet many of the requirements. This worksheet does not provide multiple means of representation and doesn't allow students to express multiple means of understanding. It also does not have multiple ways to engage students in learning. Referring to the Online Accessibility Handbook, the Word document does not match or align with any of the best practices listed. There's no color contrast. There aren't really any headings. There are a few headings, the I can statement, the let's review, and then down here there is step-by-step practices, but other than that there's no headings throughout the worksheet. There are no tables. There's not really any lists besides the step-by-step, and there's not any links to other course content or practices that students could use after they filled out this worksheet. There are no alternative text to images or a plugin for students to write math equations. My students do use this document on their iPads. So like I mentioned before, they will go into Schoology and get this document from our Schoology course, and then they can upload it to Notability, which allows them to write and edit on their iPad. So it's kind of like a way to edit documents or PDFs depending on how I upload it. So they would have to be able to write out the equations. There's no, like I mentioned, a software or a plugin for students to write the math equations in a proper way, which can get a little bit hard when we start to do fractions. The handbook does give great step-by-step directions on how to make the document more accessible to all learners, and I definitely will be looking at their suggestions and changing some of my worksheets. Some of the things that I will be changing are definitely my headings. It doesn't follow the standard heading 1, heading 2, heading 3 format that they listed in the handbook. I'm pretty sure that the I can statement is a heading, but then everything else is just different size fonts. It's not formatted in the heading way that they wrote in the handbook. So that's something I'll definitely be changing on my worksheets. Another thing is the font. I usually do try to keep my font very basic in an Arial or a Times New Roman, but this is a shared worksheet that I have with other teachers in my building. So someone else had made it and then uploaded it to our Dropbox, and then we pull materials. So since we do share materials, sometimes we can't be as picky with how things are laid out. But if I were to make a document by myself, I would definitely keep the font more simplistic. Also the color, it is just black and white, and I think it would make it a little bit more interesting to separate things based on color. I know in the handbook it said not to put color directly with certain words or vocabulary because students may be colorblind and it may be hard for them to differentiate between the colors used, but I think it would be interesting to add a different piece of color to this, especially maybe when we tend down to the worksheet and the step-by-step directions. Another thing that I would change is a table. There isn't really any table on this worksheet, and I think it would be beneficial to switch the way the layout is. They have the step-by-step directions at the bottom, and I think it would be better to have them at the top and then have the practicing at the bottom with their workspace, because it just makes more sense that way. I'm not sure why it's set up with the step-by-step directions on how to add and subtract fractions with like denominators at the bottom and then the practice at the top. So that's something I would definitely change, is the layout and the table. And then finally, something else I would change is how students would enter equations. Like I mentioned, I currently use Notability, which students have the option to write in the equation, but that is difficult for many students in my classroom, and in an online setting that would also be hard because they're not going to be able to export it to that Notability app. So having some type of software where they can write the equations in the proper form with a numerator and denominator and the fraction bar in the middle. I do adapt and modify my content in class, but when looking at the guidelines and principles, this worksheet does not meet a lot of the requirements. My students do have this worksheet as a paper copy to use if they don't want to use it on Notability on their iPads, which some of them do prefer to write out their work and not use online materials. But after evaluating this course material, it really has me wondering if I'm making enough adaptations and modifications for my students in terms of my resources. If I were to teach this online course using these materials, there would definitely be several changes I would have to make in order to make it accessible for all learners. So this is just one piece of material that I use in the classroom. So I tried to use two different materials. I used an online website, Schoology, as my first evaluation, and now this worksheet as my second. And I do think that there is a big difference between both materials and their evaluations. I felt Schoology was a lot more accessible to all learners, where this worksheet is not. So I tried to use two very different things for this module. So I look forward to hearing your thoughts on my evaluation and both of my course resources that I chose to use in this module. Thank you.